My general posture is we shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. We shouldn't ask Israel or any other country to negotiate with terrorists. You know, we didn't negotiate with Japan after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We said unconditional surrender and release the 40,000 Americans you hold. And that's what they did. But we wouldn't be in this position here in January of 2025 if that's the position Joe Biden had taken in October of 2023. If we had simply backed Israel to the hilt from the beginning of this war, providing Israel the weapons that it needed when it needed them and in the quantities that it needed them, and certainly not putting diplomatic and political pressure on Israel to cut bad deals for the last 15 months. And in all of these exit speeches and exit interviews, Mark, Tony Blinken has admitted that every time U.S. or international pressure was brought to bear on Israel, it caused Hamas to walk away from the table or to make more unreasonable demands because they thought that Joe Biden or European leaders would put the pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu that Hamas couldn't on the battlefield. So the reason we're in this position, where there are still almost 100 hostages left in Gaza, 7 of whom are Americans, is because Joe Biden has been a weak, failed president who hasn't backed Israel.
So very, very important points. And you raised something about Netanyahu. I don't know about you, Senator, but I've about had it up to here. I am sick and tired of the attacks on Netanyahu from all corners. The pressure on Netanyahu that he has to give in to the terrorists, that he has to give in to the Saudis, that he has to do this, that he has to do that. This is the leader of a country. It's very difficult to become the leader of Israel under their electoral system and the way they set up governments. He's the longest-serving prime minister, and yet it's like the Israelis always have to give in. They have to give in to Hamas, they have to give in to Iran, they have to give in to Saudi Arabia. Iran is a terrorist regime. Saudi Arabia is a monarchical dictatorship, and a vicious one at that. Qatar is a terrorist-supporting regime. Egypt is a military dictatorship. Israel's a democracy. So why are we always putting the shoulder on Israel, threatening Israel's existence, Israel's defense, Israel's liberty, when they're surrounded by all these individuals, all these countries, and we act like it's Israel that's the problem?
Yeah, and Mark, that's not just bad for Israel, it's bad for the United States because Israel is our best ally in the region.
Hamas carried out an atrocious operation. They sent a bunch of savages into Israel with the express and explicit purpose of targeting civilians. They went into concerts. They went into these music festivals. They knew that there were no soldiers at the music festival. They knew that these were teenagers and young families, that they went into different communities and the kibbutzes and the like, and they deliberately targeted civilians. Deliberately. It was in fact, they kidnapped the ones they didn't murder, the families who they didn't eviscerate, the people whose skulls they didn't crack open. They kidnapped and to this day continue to hold people, innocents that they took. A deliberate operation. In the case of Israel, responding to that attack has had to go after Hamas. How can you coexist? How can any nation state on the planet coexist side by side with a group of savages like Hamas? They have to defend their national security and their national interest, as I pointed out in my opening statement. And so there is no more, and they didn't target civilians. Now, sadly and unfortunately, and I'm sure we'll discuss it further, some of the other questions that will come up here today, one of the horrible things about war, it's a terrible thing about war, and it's why we should try to prevent it at almost any cost, is that innocent people are caught up in it. And that's true of every conflict on the planet. But there is a difference between those who, in the conduct of armed action, deliberately target civilians, and those who do as much as they can to avoid civilians being caught up against an enemy that doesn't wear a uniform, against an enemy that hides in tunnels, against an enemy that hides behind women and children, and puts them at the forefront and uses them as human shields. That's who Hamas is. There is no moral equivalency, and I think the ICC, if they don't drop this, will find its credibility globally badly damaged, and I think the United States should be very concerned because I believe this is a test run for applying it to American service members and American leaders in the future.
Well said. I couldn't agree with you more. And
as was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I'm a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume that's our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops were committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think our troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they have. We're not the outcomes, and tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on that, but it doesn't put a stain on what those men and women did in uniform, as you know full well, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth.
The Washington Post on May 11th wrote an article. I'm going to read the opening paragraph. The Biden administration, working urgently to stave off a full-scale Israeli invasion of Rafa, is offering Israel valuable assistance in an effort to persuade it to hold back, including sensitive intelligence to help the Israeli military pinpoint the location of Hamas leaders and find the group's hidden tunnels, according to 4 people familiar with the U.S. offers. Is that paragraph accurate?
Exactly the opposite. First of all, no one has done more to defend Israel than Joe Biden.
Is that paragraph accurate?
Let me finish, if I may, please. He was there right after.
I'm not interested in a campaign speech. I have limited time. Is the paragraph in the Washington Post accurate?
As you read it, no. To the contrary, we're providing everything we possibly can to Israel to help them find.
So the 4 sources that briefed the Post, and by the way, briefed multiple other media outlets, they were lying?
Absolutely.
So, all right, so that, did the administration offer to provide the locations of senior Hamas leaders to Israel if they didn't invade Rafah?
That's, again, totally misleading and wrong. Here's what we've said, and here's what we're doing. We have said that there is a better way to deal with the challenge that...
I'm not interested in the speech.
If you don't want to hear my answer...
Did you offer the location of senior Hamas officials if they didn't invade Rafah? That's a yes or no?
If we had the locations, of course we'd provide them, irrespective.
So this statement, you're saying the Post got it totally wrong, it is utterly false, and anyone who said to the contrary was lying and perjuring themselves if they were under oath.
That statement is incorrect. We have done, will continue to do everything we can to, if we can do it, develop the information and share the information. I wish we had it.
Does the administration have intelligence on the locations of Hamas officials that you have not shared with Israel?
No.
Does the administration have the locations of Hamas terror tunnels that you have not shared with Israel?
No.
Okay, so then your position is that this story is an utter and complete lie.
As you've read it to me, Senator, it's not. It is not accurate.
And we're not interested in playing word games. I've asked you very directly.
I have not.
So you're saying there's not a single Hamas leader that you know about that you or the administration has offered will tell you where they are if you don't invade
That is correct.
Rafah. What have you offered them not to invade Rafah?
We've offered them nothing not to invade Rafah except a plan to deal more effectively with Rafah.
Okay, so your testimony under oath is you've offered them nothing not to invade Rafah. I find that very hard to believe, but I just want to understand what your testimony is.
I'll be very clear. We have told them, we've been engaged in a long conversation with them about the most effective way to deal with the problem we agree must be dealt with.
They are quite aware you disagree with their plan to kill the Hamas terrorists because you and the president have vocally said it. And to be clear, your State Department on the morning of October 7th sent out a tweet telling Israel not to engage in military retaliation. I called you out at 3 in the morning and you deleted that tweet. The next day, you personally on October 8th sent a tweet saying you'd spoken with the Turkish foreign minister and Israel should not retaliate. From the very beginning, the Biden administration has consistently at every stage told Israel, and by the way, when I called your tweet out, you deleted it again. At every stage, you have been telling Israel, do not kill the terrorists, and that has been from day one.
Senator, I was in Israel 5 days after October 7th. I've been there 7 times since. No one, starting with President Biden, has done more to make sure they have what they need to defend themselves from Hamas, to deal with the threat that Hamas poses.
With all due respect, that is ludicrous. That is ludicrous. Why have you cut off weapons to Israel then?
We have not cut off weapons to Israel. In fact, as you know well, starting many years ago, President Biden was at the heart of the MOU that led to Israel having a 10-year guaranteed supply of assistance. When you became
Secretary of State, how much oil was Iran selling a day?
I'll have to come back to you on any numbers. I don't have the numbers.
You don't know. It doesn't surprise me you don't know. It was about 300,000. How much oil is Iran selling today?
We've applied sanctions against more than 200 entities that are engaged in petrochemicals.
How much oil?
You can tell me. I'm sure.
Don't filibuster.
Sure you know. I'm not filibustering.
How much oil are they selling today? Do you know?
You tell me.
Apparently you don't know. So you don't know how much they were selling. It was 300,000. Today they're selling about 2 million barrels a day. Let me ask you.
And given the sanctions, given the export controls, given the other controls we put on, the cost of doing that, the evasion that they have to engage in, which we're trying to cut off.
They've made about $80 billion. Let me ask you another question. I'm running out of time, so I'm not interested in speeches. Let me ask you this. How many Ghost Fleet ships did Iran have in November 2020?
We have sanctioned more than 200
It's a question.
of those.
I'm not. How many did they have?
The total number, I can't tell you what it had in 2021. I'll come back to you with that, but we have...
the number was about 70.
Yeah,
how many did they have today?
We blocked about 50 of them.
Okay, let's see how effective you are. How many do they have today?
As I said, we blocked about 50
How many do they have today?
You tell me, I'm sure you...
They have about over 400. Look, this administration desperately wants a new Iran deal. You have been showering cash on Iran from day one. And understand, the $6 billion you were asked about is the tip of the iceberg. By refusing to enforce oil sanctions, we have seen Iran's oil sales go from 300,000 barrels a day when you got into office to over 2 million barrels a day today. That's $80 billion. 90% of Hamas's funding comes from Iran in a very real sense. This administration, you and President Biden, funded the October 7th attacks by flowing $100 billion to a homicidal, genocidal regime that funded those attacks.
That statement is profoundly wrong.
Why?
I'm not even going to humor it. I think it's a disgraceful statement.
Why?
We have gone at Iran repeatedly with more than 600 sanctions applied against different persons.
Then why are they selling 2 million barrels a day as compared to 300,000?
They are working hard to do what they can to get around the sanctions.
So just the prior administration had tools you didn't have, they were more effective, or maybe they just weren't desperate to cut a deal with Iran.
And we continue every single day to go at them.
You are refusing to address the facts.
I'm not.
Then why are they selling 2 million barrels a day?
Because they're determined to try to do that. We're determined to cut them off.
They weren't determined when Trump was president?
They were determined. And, of course, unfortunately, we also had their nuclear program in a box. No fissile material being produced.
Okay, you're not answering the question. You're filibustering another topic.
Senator Cruz, you get the last word. You get the last word, Billy.
You funded our enemies and you undermine our friends, and the world is much, much more dangerous as a result, and Americans are at greater jeopardy because of it.
In fact, we brought more countries together. We have stronger allies, stronger partnerships, stronger engagement from countries around the world to deal with a very dangerous world than we had. We were alone, we aren't anymore, and America is leading those efforts.
Remember the Abraham Accords?
I do.
Let me just